webinar. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Aubro de Grey briefly. Dr. Aubro de Grey, an eminent author and biomedical gerontologist. He did his schooling from Success House School and Harrow School. Later, he attended University of Cambridge and became graduate in computer science in 1985. Further, he joined Sinclair Research Limited as an artificial intelligence and software engineer. Later, Cambridge University awarded him a PhD by publication in biology on December 2000. This degree was based on his book, The Mitochondrial Free Radical Theory of Aging. Apart from all these academic achievements, he is the Chief Science Officer of Sense Research Foundation, a California-based biomedical research charity. In addition of all this, he is editor-in-chief of Rejuvenation Research, the world's highest impact peer-reviewed journal. His research interest focuses the characterization of all the types of self-inflicted cellular and molecular damage that constitute mammalian aging and the design of interventions to repair and obviation that damage. Dr. D. Gray is a fellow of both the Gerontological Society of America and the American Aging Association, and also chairing the position of editorial and scientific advisory boards of numerous journals and organizations. His today's topic of discussion is Rejuvenation Biotechnology, why age may soon cease to mean aging. Now, I request to Dr. D. Gray to begin his lecture and enlighten this august gathering. Thank you. This lecture would be of 45 minutes. Later, there would be a question session of 10 to 15 minutes. Now I request to Dr. D. Aubro to please begin his lecture.
Hello, thank you very much. Good morning. I am speaking to you from California, so I am 12 and a half hours behind you. I am very glad that it was possible to find a time of day that worked for everybody. And I am delighted to be speaking to this audience. It has been a few years now since I last visited India, but I always loved coming there. And so this is the next best thing, I suppose. So now let me just share my screen and show you my slides. Won't be a moment. Screen. I have a problem, see it? It's host disabled attendee screen sharing. So you are going to have to do something in order to allow me to show my slides. Okay. I'm not allowed to do so right now.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
I still can't do it. I'm trying to share my screen and I am getting a notice that says the host disabled attendee screen sharing. So I think you have to make me a host.
I have allowed.
That's it. That's it. You've done it, I think.
Please share.
Yeah, you've done it. Yeah, you've done it. Give me a... Okay, this is going to work now. Just give me a moment. How to do it. I'm trying to share my screen and I'm getting a notice that the host disabled. Now, tell me, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, your screen is visible.
Okay, great. Here we go. Okay, thank you again. So this is the title of my talk, and I will explain what the title means, and then I will explain how we are doing it. Sense Research Foundation is a charity, a biomedical research organization. And I think some people need to mute their audio because I can hear feedback. Yeah, Sense Research Foundation is a biomedical research organization in California. We are working to bring about the research that I'm going to tell you about today. So first of all, let me, this is a problem, hang on. Okay, I have a different. There we go. All right. So yes. So first of all, what is the problem that we are working on? Of course, it is the problem of aging. So I apologize, I could not immediately find statistics from India, but here are some statistics from the USA. And what this graph shows is the proportion of the US population who are over the age of 65. And this graph goes from 1900 to 2050, 1950 to 2050. Now, of course, that's just a projection, but we can be pretty sure of it. And furthermore, it is the same across the world. It's the same in India. Of course, you are a little later than us in this curve, but your life expectancy is going up every year. India is catching up with the Western world. So this is a global phenomenon. And of course, there is a problem with it. The problem is that when people get old, they get sick. And furthermore, they tend to stay sick for a long time before they die. So in the Western world, the vast majority of the medical expenditure that takes place is for the health problems of late life. And in the developing world, this is also becoming true. So, as I mentioned, India is catching up with the Western world. Even sub-Saharan Africa is catching up. There isn't a single country in the world now whose life expectancy is less than 50. So even though I am showing you American statistics here, just for illustration, somebody needs, Zahur, you need to mute your microphone.
Excuse me, audience. Please mute your mobile. Please don't speak during that session. This is a request to all of you.
Thank you,
Please,
CA.
Dr. Gray, continue.
So this is again data from the USA, but it's happening everywhere. And so what this graph shows is a period of 50 years from 1960 through to 2010. And the red line is the growth of the US economy during that time. It grew a great deal, of course. The blue line is the growth of the medical expenditure in America during that same period. And as you can see, it also goes up. But it doesn't look particularly scary when we draw it like that. However, it looks terrifying when we draw the green line, which is simply the red line divided by the blue line. The proportion of the US budget that is spent on medical care. Absolutely astonishing. It went up from 5% to 18% in just 50 years. And of course, that is why everybody thinks that Social Security is going to go bankrupt, that we're just going to have to find a very different way to pay for the health problems of the elderly. And let me emphasize one more time, this is not just a problem of the Western world. This is the problem that affects every single country. Some countries are only beginning to be affected by it, but the more you move forward, the more prosperous you get, the more the life expectancy rises, the more your economy will look like this. So, what do we do? Well, the first thing that we need to do in order to solve a really difficult problem is to describe the problem. And people don't do that enough in this case, not nearly enough. People are not very rigorous about describing what aging is, why it is difficult to solve, those things. So I'm going to start there. And the first thing I'm going to do is to ask this very simple question. What is the big difference between aging and the infectious diseases that used to kill so many people early in life? Of course, infectious diseases still kill quite a lot of people early in life in the developing world, but the proportion is going down and down really fast. And in the Western world, it's almost zero now. But 200 years ago, more than 1/3 of babies used to die before the age of 1, even in the US or the UK or the wealthiest countries in the world. And the way that we fixed that problem was really simple. All we did was we figured out that hygiene is a good idea. And we invented very simple medicines like vaccines and antibiotics and, mosquito nets. It worked. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, why have the same kinds of medicines not worked against the health problems of late life? Now, perhaps the main reason why people do not ask that question enough is because they think they already know the answer. They think that this is the answer. It's simply, aging is so complicated. Don't worry, you're not supposed to be able to read this slide. I am just emphasizing that in late life, a lot of things go wrong, a huge number of things. And they go wrong at more or less the same time, which means that they interact, they exacerbate each other. So most people think that that's all it is, that it's just the sheer complexity of the whole thing that causes in medicine to be overwhelmed and to be unable to cope with it. But actually, that's not the main answer. It's part of the answer, yes, but it's not the main answer. So in order to explain the main answer, I'm going to give a bit more background. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a definition of aging. Now, if you think about it, it's completely crazy that I would need to do this. Aging has been the #1 preoccupation of humanity for the entire history of civilization. Really, it really has. And, it's rather surprising that we don't even agree about what it is. So here is a definition that I'm going to use for the rest of this talk. And actually, it's not really even my idea, this definition. It's not controversial. If you ask anyone who works on the biology of aging whether they disagree with this definition, they won't. They will say, yeah, that will do. That's a pretty good definition. But it still wouldn't necessarily be the definition that they would give you themselves. Different people have subtly different definitions, and that's a big problem. All right, so what is this definition? What do I mean by this little diagram? Well, what I'm saying is that aging is the combination of two processes. First of all, there's a process that goes on throughout life, the one on the left here, where our metabolism generates damage. So metabolism is the word that biologists use to denote the entire network of processes that keep us alive from one day to the next. And of course, that means that metabolism goes on throughout life, even starting before we're born. And throughout life, even starting before we're born, metabolism creates damage. So what is damage? Damage is simply changes that happen to the molecular and cellular structure and composition of the body that are consequences of metabolism. And in particular, these are changes which are progressive. They continue to happen throughout life. And the one other thing that defines what damage is that the body can only tolerate a certain amount of it. The body is set up to tolerate a certain amount of these various changes without a significant decline in mental or physical function, but only a certain amount. And eventually, there's more damage than that. It reaches that threshold. And that's when the right-hand process kicks in. The right-hand process is when damage starts to cause the pathologies of late life. That's the diseases of aging, the other things that go wrong that cause a gradual decline in mental and physical function late in life. And eventually, of course, they kill us. So that's what aging is. It's just the combination of these two processes. All right, so let's talk a bit more about that. First of all, let's talk about how it distinguishes, how it differs from the ways that a lot of people might colloquially define aging. So here is a little table, which is my summary of the answer that most people would give if you ask them this question. If you ask them, in what ways can somebody get sick? If you ask most people that question, they will say, well, there are infectious diseases. That's column 1, communicable diseases. And then there are genetic diseases that a few of us are unlucky enough to inherit from our parents. That's column 2. And then there's the big one, the chronic progressive diseases of late life. Things like Alzheimer's disease or cancer, or almost all cancers anyway, or atherosclerosis, or type 2 diabetes, or osteoporosis, all of those things. Those are the diseases of aging in most people's mind. But then most people say, well, okay, there's another way to get sick, which is aging itself. And they don't really have a good definition in their heads of what they mean by that. It consists in their minds of these rather poorly defined things like frailty. And the thing that really I want to emphasize here is that most people think of aging as not like diseases at all, as completely separate. That's what I'm trying to denote by that big, thick black line. That somehow it's so different from diseases that it's kind of off limits to medicine. It's kind of woven into the fabric of the universe, and it's completely inevitable and universal and natural and stuff like that. So I want to explain to you that that is a real problem. This is the way that we ought to be classifying the ways in which we can get sick. If you look closely, you will see that all the columns are exactly the same as before. The only thing I've done is I've moved that big, thick black line. So what this means is that what we should really be doing is we should be distinguishing the pathologies of the whole of life, early onset ones, from the pathologies of late life. Really, I'm emphasizing 2 mistakes in the previous version by moving the black line. The first mistake that I am emphasizing is that the things in column 3 are nothing like the things in column 1. They're not like infections at all. And that means that there is no reason why we should expect that the things in column 3 would be cured by the same kind of medicine that has worked so well for the things in column 1. The other thing that moving the black line emphasizes is that the things in column 3 have almost no difference. They're almost identical to the things in column 4. In fact, they really are identical biologically. The only real difference between the things in column 3 and the things in column 4 is the things in column 3 are the aspects of aging that we have chosen to give disease-like names to. It's a purely semantic difference. So why have I spent so long on this? Why do I say that this is so important to get right? Well, the fundamental reason I say that is because if you get it wrong, you're going to go about dealing with aging in the wrong way. So here's my definition of aging again, the combination of these 2 processes. Now, what is our goal? What would we like? What we'd like is to be able to separate metabolism from pathology. We'd like to carry on being alive, in other words, performing metabolism, without eventually getting sick with the pathologies of late life. And at the moment, almost all of the effort that is focused on doing that consists of this one thing here, one category of interventions that I'm calling geriatrics. Geriatrics is all about waiting until we get sick and then trying to fix that. In other words, it's doing exactly what I just told you is probably not going to work. In other words, trying to apply the same kind of medical strategy to the pathologies of late life that we would to infections. It's just not going to work. It's easy to see that it's not going to work just by looking at this simple little diagram. Because, of course, what that would mean is that we are trying to cure the consequences of something that's accumulating. That's damage, of course. And that's obviously not going to work. By definition, geriatrics is going to become progressively less effective as the damage accumulates and the person gets older. It's obviously never going to work. So the question we may ask ourselves is, okay, why haven't we realized that? Why haven't we understood that this is just a completely wrong-headed way of trying to keep people healthy late in life? Well, the thing is, it's not completely true that we haven't. In fact, more than a century ago, some people started to realize that this just was never going to work and we needed something different. And in particular, they realized that we should be more preventative. We should try to intervene earlier in the chain of events. They said, well, supposing we try to just make metabolism run more cleanly. In other words, generate damage more slowly than normal. If we could stop metabolism from generating damage, that would be great. We will be done. People would not get enough damage to cause them to get sick. So that would work. And the inspiration for this approach comes from the living world. If we look at the whole of life, we see, of course, that some animals live a lot longer than others. And in other words, they accumulate damage a lot more slowly than others. So maybe we can learn something from that. So this was the inspiration for the creation of the field called gerontology. The idea that if we would study the difference between different species really, really hard, eventually we might understand it well enough to be able to actually do something with it, to translate that understanding into the design of therapies that would actually clean up the way metabolism works and slow down the rate at which damage is generated. But unfortunately, even though we've been at it for more than a century, this has been also completely unsuccessful. It has not given rise to any postponement of the health problems of late life. Why not? Well, really, it's this. It's complexity. Metabolism is viciously complicated. What I'm showing you here is actually a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how the body works, about how metabolism works. And of course, you can see how messed up it is. Any of you who have ever written software will immediately see that this is the ultimate nightmare of uncommented spaghetti code, right? Plus, it's just like the creation of damage is so intrinsic. It is so wound up in the process of keeping us alive. So there is just no way that we're ever going to be able to disentangle it, to stop metabolism from doing things we don't want it to do, creating damage, without at the same time stopping it from doing things that we need it to do to keep us alive. But luckily, that's not the end of the story, because it turns out that there is a third approach. Let's come back and remember what we are trying to achieve here. We're trying to separate metabolism from pathology. In other words, to let people carry on being alive without getting sick. And I've demonstrated to you so far that we can't do it by breaking either the right-hand process by geriatric medicine that makes us not get sick even though we're accumulating damage. That's not possible. And the left-hand process is also, we can't break that because metabolism is just going to create damage. We can't stop that from happening. So the maintenance approach is a damage repair approach. It says, okay, let's live with the fact that damage is going to be created, and let's let metabolism create damage at the normal rate, but then let us go in and eliminate that damage. Not perfectly, just, repair some of it every so often, so that means it will never reach the level which is pathogenic, which causes people to get sick. And that is really the common sense approach to separating metabolism from pathology. Why do I say so? Well, simply because we already do it successfully. Now, when I say we do it successfully, of course, I'm not talking about aging anymore, because we definitely can't do anything about aging yet. What I'm talking about is aging of machines. If you think about it, if we try to define aging in a car or an aeroplane or any other simple man-made machine, we could use the exact same definition that I have used to define aging of you and me or of any other living organism. Aging is still the same thing. Any machine with moving parts is going to do itself damage as a consequence of its normal operation. And that damage is going to accumulate, and eventually the machine is not going to work so well, and eventually it's not going to work at all. So how did this machine get to be this way? This car, of course, is more than 100 years old, and it was not designed to last 100 years. It was designed to last probably 10 years. So what happened? Well, it wasn't geriatric medicine, was it? Because geriatric medicine is the equivalent of waiting until the doors fall off the car and then just putting the doors back and hoping and having the doors fall off again, a week later. And it's also not the equivalent of gerontology. We have not found some way to stop rust from happening. Rust is, a fact of physics. If you take your car out on the road, it's going to rust. So the way it was done was damage repair. Periodically removing the rust, periodically replacing the oil, all those things. It works. So it ought to work for this much more complicated machine called the human body as well. A summary, a kind of, soundbite statement of this is what I've written on the top line here. Aging is not a phenomenon of biology. It's not like, consciousness that is inherently only something that living organisms are able to possess. It's a phenomenon of physics. It's just the same for any machine that has moving parts, whether or not that machine is alive. So comprehensive preventative maintenance works. The only part of this which I have not yet demonstrated is I haven't addressed the question of how complicated the damage is. I've emphasized to you already that the thing that causes the damage is really complicated, that's metabolism. And I've also explained that the consequences of damage are really complicated. That's the pathologies of late life. So maybe the damage itself is complicated too. And that would mean that, yes, okay, this is the common sense approach, but it's still not practical. Luckily, though, that's not true. It turns out that damage is, yes, it's complicated, but it's not unmanageably complicated. So here we have a classification of damage on the left-hand side of this table. Every single phenomenon that happens in the human body that qualifies as damage, by this definition I'm using today, these consequences of metabolism that accumulate throughout life and eventually make us sick, they can be classified into these 7 major categories. And the purpose of this classification, this is really important to understand, the purpose of this classification is to define the therapies that we need in order to repair the damage. For each of these categories, there are many examples within the category, but that's okay, because for each category, there is a generic therapy that can be applied to any example within the category and repair the damage. So let me just, for illustration, talk about the first category, cell loss. What's going on there? It's simply cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division of other cells. And that obviously it happens in various parts of the body. It happens in certain parts of the brain, it happens in the heart, happens in the immune system. And there is a very simple conceptually simple way to deal with it. We simply use stem cell therapy. We put cells into the body that have been programmed in the laboratory into the right state so that they know how to divide and differentiate in order to replace the cells that the body is not replacing on its own. And sure enough, there are stem cell clinical trials in progress right now in human beings to replace the stem cells in the brain, the cells in the brain that whose death causes Parkinson's disease, for example. We're also interested in replacing the cells whose death causes certain types of heart failure, and so on. Now, I haven't got time in this talk to go through all of the other categories, but the important thing I want you to remember is that there is something in the right-hand side of this table for every row. In other words, we know in principle how to do all of this damage repair. Now, of course, I have to say, in principle, most of these types of damage repair are still in the process of being developed, and that's why Sense Research Foundation exists. But they're all moving forward really well right now. This is an example, or some examples of what I'm talking about. So all of the papers that I'm listing here were published by Sense Research Foundation, or by groups that we have funded. And this is just a small selection of the papers that we have produced over the past decade. I've highlighted these ones just because these are particularly important breakthrough results, ones which showed the world that an approach to damage repair, to repair of a particular type of damage, is possible, even though they may not have previously thought that it was possible at all. Furthermore, we have persuaded the scientific community that this is really an idea. When I first started talking about this, back here in 2002, almost everybody who was working on the biology of aging thought that I was crazy. Hardly anybody really understood what I was saying. But 11 years later, people are coming out saying exactly the same thing in slightly different words. This is a group that divided aging into 9 categories instead of 7. It's the exact same idea. And now it's virtually holy scripture. You know, people are, this is by far the most highly cited paper in the whole of the biology of aging for the past 10 years. Everyone uses it as the justification for their work. So this approach, this divide and conquer damage repair approach, is now the way in which most gerontologists are thinking about how to address the problem of aging. So now, where are we going from here? Well, the first thing I want to emphasize is this is just medical research. I do a lot of media, a lot of outreach, and of course, the media often like to be sensationalist. So they will often describe me as things like, the prophet of immortality. They will make a big deal about the fact that I have a long beard, stuff like that. But that's, of course, not what we actually do. We just work on health. So I always have to remind people that longevity is simply a side effect of health. That, most people die from being sick, in other words, not being healthy. And therefore, if we can keep people healthy, on average, they're going to live longer. And in this case, quite a lot longer. And yes, that's a great thing. But it's not the purpose of this work. The purpose of this work is health. And so, a lot of people that I speak to, especially non-scientists, they will say the kinds of things that you see on the left here. They will say, oh dear, where will we put all the people? Or they'll say, won't it only be for the rich? Or won't dictators live forever? Or even, things like, doesn't death give meaning to life? Now, it's really easy to explain why these objections are idiotic. But, the main thing you have to think about is, why would people even have these objections? And to my mind, the only real reason is that people are terrified of getting their hopes up with regard to this research. There have been people telling you that they know how to defeat aging since pretty much the beginning of civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the myth of Tithonus, things like that. And they've always been wrong. So, of course, it's reasonable to be cautious when somebody else comes along and tells you the same thing. But the fact is, we are right this time. It is coming. It's quite close. And it's time for us to make it closer by giving up these crazy, stupid, irrational reasons why this might not be a good idea. Another measure of how close we are to getting this all to work is that it's no longer just the province of academic research. A lot of the projects that we have worked on at Sense Research Foundation have now been spun out as startup companies. And the reason that was possible is because there are now a lot of investors who are getting really interested in all of this and who are writing checks, big checks. Well, certainly bigger than the kinds of checks that they were willing to write when it was just a philanthropic donation to a charity. So that's pretty good news. And in fact, that is only the tip of the iceberg, because there are probably a couple of hundred startups now across the whole of this field that have started up independently of us, but doing very similar, closely aligned work. And, you know, I can't keep up anymore. If you're interested in having an up-to-date understanding of this, go to the website that I've noted at the bottom right of this slide, which is maintained by one of the more active angel investors in this space. And it's, you know, he's done a great public service here, because there are lots and lots of companies that are worth looking at if you're an investor. And of course, the reason there are is because there are now lots of investors. More and more people are realizing that this is the next big thing. So, you know, how close is this actually? Well, it's close enough that people can make money out of it, but that doesn't necessarily tell you the answer, because, of course, people can make money before things are really have really reached the point of revenue, just through IPOs and, you know, acquisitions. So I'm going to give you an honest answer to this question. I think that we have a 50-50 chance of getting all of this working within only the next 17 or so years. More than 50% in 20 years, obviously. Now, of course, I have to emphasize that this estimate of the time frame is extremely speculative. Since this is pioneering technology, we may very well hit new obstacles. There's at least a 10% chance that we won't get there for 100 years. But so what, you know? What matters is to try and get there as quickly as possible, because every single day that we bring forward the defeat of aging, we will save more than 100,000 lives. How do I get that number? I simply look at how many people die each day today. The answer is about 155,000 people. And I look at the percentage of those people who die from sicknesses that hardly anybody who is a young adult dies of. It comes out around 70 or 75% of all deaths. So that's well over 100,000 deaths every day. I'd like to save those lives. Now, the therapies that I'm talking about today, the therapies that we're working on at the moment, will not completely eliminate aging, but they will postpone it by a lot, maybe 20 or 30 years. And that will be enough for scientists to improve the therapies and postpone it again for the same people. Remember here, we're talking about damage repair. So rejuvenation, actually not just slowing down the clock of aging, but genuinely turning it backwards. So that means that we will be able to buy time for the same people to be rejuvenated again and again. And that's what I have called longevity escape velocity. Now, I believe that we are extremely close to the point where progress in the laboratory has been enough to get people to understand what I said. It really just relies on experts like me going out and telling the general public that, yes, this is coming. At the moment, most of those experts are much more cautious than me. They have to be, because they need government funding and they have to avoid being being accused of saying irresponsible things to the public. But that won't last very long now. So I'm going to stop there and just mention that if you want to know more, there are ways to find out more. First of all, with my book. I wrote this book more than a decade ago now, but it's still very relevant. There's been masses and masses of progress in that time, of course, as I've already mentioned. But the good news is that that progress has been pretty much exactly what we predicted it would be. There has not been any need to reinvent a new paradigm, or, there's not been even any new type of damage that's been identified. It's still basically the same plan as it was back then. So I recommend this book. It's written for the general audience, but I call it semi-technical because it doesn't cut any corners either. Definitely you will need to read it slowly, even if you're a biologist. Then, of course, there's our website. We are a very active organization, and we have a very informative website, I like to think. We have material there for everyone, whether you're an extreme expert already or whether you're a complete novice. And of course, we've also got a nice contact form. You can email us, or you can, for that matter, just write to us through the website, and I see all those emails. We're very good at replying to them. So I will stop there, and I'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank thank you. Thank you to Dr. D. Gray for his enlightened lecture. Truly, mankind has faced many challenges during her journey, and now we have entered into the age where we are talking about the longevity and ending aging. Definitely, it will reduce the rate of mortality, and surely this lecture has encouraged the new generations or new researchers to carry forward this field of research. And now I request to audience to pose their questions, but the questions should be through chat box, and Dr. Gray will answer accordingly. Please, audience, you can raise your questions through chat box. Thank you. And it is, and this question answer session is for 10 minutes only.
Well, I'm checking the chat. Can't see anything yet. It usually takes people a few minutes to think of what to say when I have given it. Okay. I have found a different. There are two chat boxes. There's one called chat and there's one called Q&A. So let me. So I've opened the Q&A now. Let me see what I can do. What is the extent? Venkata Ernie says, what is the extent of studies on telomere shortening using a genetic approach? There's lots of work on that. We are doing quite a bit. So are lots of other people. The thing about telomere shortening is that sometimes it's a good thing, because telomere shortening does not happen in cancer cells. And if it did, then we wouldn't get cancer, because because cancers would essentially divide into oblivion. They would get critically short telomeres before they became large enough to kill us. So, worlds to to make telomeres longer in cells that need it, and not to make telomeres longer in cancer cells, and it's going pretty well. The next question: what are your suggestions to slow aging in daily life? Unfortunately, I don't really have any. Of course, it's important to have a good diet and not to get seriously overweight, and it's definitely important not to smoke. I know that that's still a big problem in India. But really, there is nothing special to say about this. The real thing that we need is therapies that don't yet exist, because the main things that cause you to age are not things that you have a choice about. The number one single worst thing that you're doing right now for your aging is breathing. And I don't mean breathing polluted air, I mean breathing any air. The actual metabolic processes that use oxygen create free radicals, toxins, and it's a main driver of aging. So we only have the option of developing damage repair therapy. The next question I'm seeing is, there's a question about menopause. Yes, absolutely. So menopause, of course, arises from aging of the ovary, when the ovary no longer has follicles that mature every month. And the ovary is just another organ. So it's just as possible to regenerate and rejuvenate the ovary as it is for any other organ, like the liver or the heart. And that's already in progress. People are making great progress in rejuvenating the ovary. So when we get this working properly, we will simply not have menopause anymore. And that means that women will be able to have babies safely at any age, which is, a big deal. Of course, some people may think that may make overpopulation problems, but it won't really, because we know that when women can have children whenever they want to, they often choose to delay having them. So actually, it may reduce fertility rates. Someone asks about the extent of research being done right now in the world and in India. Well, India is definitely doing some useful research in this space. And there are, of course, people of Indian descent who are working all over the world in the world's most prestigious universities and also who are investing in this space. So yes, India definitely has a lot of responsibility here. In fact, at Sense Research Foundation, we have a lot of scientists who are from India. We have found, many scientists who really care about all this and who are exceptionally good at what they do. Next one, what are my views about accessibility, affordability to these achievements, and also corporate exploitation? I'm really not worried about that. I don't think it's going to be anything like what we see today with today's medicines, especially not today's medicines for the elderly. It's very simple to explain why. Today's medicines for the elderly don't work, right? People still get sick. All we have is ways of keeping people alive in a poor state of health for a bit longer than they would be without those medicines. And that's not very attractive. So there is very little public pressure to have this happen. And most importantly, there is very little economic pressure, because these medicines cost society a lot of money. It doesn't matter how they're provided, whether they're provided from the taxpayer money or whether they're provided privately. They still cost a lot, and they give no benefit in terms of the wealth of the economy. They're just consuming wealth. Medicines for the elderly that actually work will be completely different. They will maintain the elderly in a state where they can continue to contribute wealth to society. So that will be great. Someone says, several anti-aging proteins are discovered recently. Do you think overexpression or engineering of such proteins would reverse the aging process? Well, of course, it's true. We are made of proteins, and lots of proteins have very important roles in processes of aging. It's important to remember, though, that proteins do not evolve for the purpose of aging. In fact, the opposite is the case. We have very sophisticated anti-aging machinery built into our bodies. So really, all we can try to do is optimize the behavior of those proteins, but they are already optimized because evolution does not want us to age. The only reason we age at all is because evolution doesn't care enough. So we are in the process of designing things that evolution could not do. And that does not really relate to proteins that already exist, or at least not in the human body. Someone says, what is the role of quality of life against longevity? Well, there is an important linkage here. Certainly, the ability to handle stress, to actually cope with stressful situations without getting anxious and stressed, in fact, that's very important. Because if you get stressed, then you make hormones like cortisol that accelerate the creation of damage in the whole body. Big linkage. If you look at people who live an exceptionally long time, centenarians, then they don't have very much in common between themselves. But, there's one thing they do have in common, which is nothing bothers them. They're really good at coping with stress. So that's one thing to bear in mind. I think I've answered all the questions that have come up on the chat. If there are any more, I'm happy to wait.
Okay. Okay. Now, and thank you very much, Dr. Gray. And now I invite to the studies for his concluding remarks. Please, Professor Zedech Khan.
I think he's muted. Syed, I think he's muted still.
Okay, yeah. Please unmute the Professor Zedech Khan. I'm requesting to administration.
Ishraq sir, I think he is muted himself.
It was.
He is trying to connect. In the meanwhile, can you please ask Sheikh Nizamuddin to...
Nizamuddin sir, please.
Yeah, now you become unmuted, I think.
Yeah, please.
You can continue.
Okay. I mean, I am very thankful to Dr. Gray to give such a brilliant exposition of his research and his findings, and to the most pleasant surprise to all of us who are old to have got a little glimpse of increasing the age span. But there are lots of philosophies even coming from religions about this death and next world and so on and so forth. I think that should also be taken into account when we are talking about the death part of it, the mortality part of it. Secondly, there have been a lot of artificial means to destroy human life. That should also be looked into, because we people are trying to search out ways for this, and you have got the whole industry working against this thing, and the artificial methods to kill people all over, and that also should really be taken into account by the scientists and researchers. So I think that this is the time when the academia and the researchers and all of them should really try to focus on as to how to create conducive conditions to have got a better life, a healthy life, and probably a longer life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zedem Khan sir. Now I'm requesting to Mr. Sheikh Nizamuddin for vote of thanks. Please,
Thank
Mr.
you very much.
Sheikh Nizamuddin.
Thank you, Manoj. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Are you audible?
Right. And before I give a final touch to the Thanksgiving, it's again, the dimension is one, it's from the social scientist point of view. There are certain questions, and particularly for the third world countries, where we look through a different perception. Okay, we do appreciate the achievements and your hard work invested in the field, in science and technology, the biotechnology, and that of course for the human civilization, which should not be exploited. Again, the question arises is that there should be a issue of accessibility, affordability, clarity, and non-exploitation from the Western interests. Anyway, we need to, in some other conversation, we will go on that again. And I really thank you, sir, for taking a time and enlightening us on a very, very important issue, which should not really remain in the academic domain. It should go public to the common man. And there is a digital divide. There is a cultural divide, of course, and we need to see to it that how we are going to solve that problem as well. Thank you very much again, and I thank all the participants in this session and the technical team of Institute of Objective Studies and the technical team of Aamnasamnamedia network for making it live on YouTube. And again, last but not the least, sir, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now I close this lecture session, and thank you, Professor Aubrey de Grey, for this enlightened lecture. And I also thanks to Professor Z.M. Khan, Secretary General of Institute of Objective Studies, and Sheikh Nizamuddin for the vote of thanks. And also thanks to all the audiences to give their immense time to listen this valuable lecture by Dr. D. Aubrey. Thank you very much, Professor Aubrey de Grey. Thank you.
Thank you.